we are blessed, truly blessed, to have two priests with us. We have Anna Sutterish and BJ Owens, and you'll get to know them just a little bit more. And they are here today in their capacities, both as Episcopalians and as Enneagram 3s. So we're moving from the romantic to the achiever and the performer or the chameleon.
To us, achievement is romance.
I had another joke I was going to build on that, but I'm just going to hold it for now.
Right.
Oh, before we get started with some more information on the Enneagram 3, we want to frame the class just a little bit with a couple of scriptures that are quite common in Christian tradition. A lot of them often show up at weddings, but it helps us set the framework for what love might look like from a Christian perspective.
Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love.
From 1 Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails.
Thank you both. For those of you who have been walking this journey with us so far, you may have already begun to notice that so many of the qualities of love, their antithesis seems to show up in our ego structures. And yet these verses call us to be like God, and in some ways for us to recognize the characteristics that show that we are being loving as God is love. So I invite you to hold this concept of what love is as we begin to explore how it takes shape in the type 3 personality structure. So I'm going to wax on just a little bit from the narrative tradition and share a little snapshot of love through an Enneagram 3 perspective, and then we'll give some room for Anna and BJ to respond to that. So the achiever, the performer, the chameleon, these are some of the terms used to describe the ego existence of type 3. As long as the 3 is in their ego structure, they lose the message that love is not something that is earned through what you do, but is freely given to you because of who you are. And a simple way that this is sometimes described by type 3 is calling the type 3 the human doing, as opposed to the human being. It's a play on words that acknowledges that the 3s are driven by a need to succeed and achieve the goals that they have set for themselves, and that their attention is focused on tasks and accomplishments. So as I mentioned last week, we talked about the Enneagram 4, our first glimpse into the heart types. And all of these heart types, as you can see on the chart in front of you, 4, 3, and 2, all of these are in the feeling triad and are shame-based types. So living from the heart gives these types of focus on their image, on the perception of others. And in particular, they're tuned into how they come across to others, and they want to meet or exceed others' expectations. So 3s can read a room really well, I would bet even this virtual room. They probably already know who's in the space. They probably already paid attention to those things, right? I'm seeing Anna chuckle just a bit. But when focus of attention is on the external world, and this is true for all of us, when focus of attention is on the external world, the internal experience can easily pass us by. So when 3s are in their ego structure and haven't been able to break out of that, they can miss out on that depth of intimate connection, the irony of the heart types having difficulty connecting with their hearts in the moment. But without those deep, intimate connections with the self, the successes that the 3s believe will win them love and affection from others can leave them feeling empty. What was all that work for anyway? And that's the movement of type 3 when they go toward 9. As you can see on this image, there's a triangle in the center of the screen, and the 3s are connected to both point 9 and point 6. And when 3 starts moving toward 9, the ego dissipates in a moment, just as quickly as it was shaped by that chameleon impulse, by trying to be what other people want them to be. And the 3 wonders whether they exist at all, some sort of essential being. Is there really an essential me? But Enneagram work and spiritual practices, which these 2 priests know a lot about, practices of mindfulness and presence, can help move a 3 toward their human being experience, toward being, which allows them to recognize and appreciate that they don't have to earn love, that love is always accessible to them. And this is part of the journey of all of the heart types, to realize that love is always there and available. And individuals who are 3s, once they have this ability to know and love their own inner selves, then their love of the world, of others, comes across as truly genuine, because it is. When they can know that they have a self apart from performance, they become self-accepting, they become inner-directed, they start to trust their own desires for what they want, that it's not about what everybody else wants for them, but it comes from this genuine and authentic place within themselves. And then all of a sudden, everything that they seem to be to others, all of these wonderful images they've projected, become true. It is who they are. They become modest and charitable masters of self-deprecating humor. They no longer have to have that perfect face on all the time, but can be silly and fun and make fun of themselves, knowing that they are still enjoyed and loved for who they are. And they experience their own fullness of heart. They can share it with others through gentleness and benevolence. They believe in themselves truly, and they know that their own value is able not only to help them move forward in the world, but their communities. And that's the movement toward type 6. When the Enneagram 3 recognizes that they can use all of the skills that they have developed over the years for others as well as for themselves. So that's enough of that for now from me. So I'm going to invite our panelists to give us a brief introduction of themselves. If you would, either of you can start, and if you would just share how you're connected to the Episcopal Church, particularly to Trinity, and how you know that you're a type 3.
Okay. Well, first, it's interesting that we're shame-based, because I felt a lot of shame in reading that description.
But then I looked at it, I felt the same thing, and then I thought, well, at least I'm not rage or fear-based, because thanks for those dudes.
But yeah, I'm Anna Sutter-Risch, and I'm the canon for Christian formation for the diocese. So I work on the bishop's staff with children, youth, and young adults. And actually how I got into Enneagram work was through, in 2012, I was a member of Trinity all through college. I know some of you from that time. I've changed a lot since that time, as I'm sure you have as well. I started hanging out with the Episcopal Service Corps folks, and they are still my best friends. I'm married to one of them now, and that was how I entered Enneagram work. And it has really helped me with relationships more. I think what's different about the Enneagram for me is that it's not just about learning about myself, which is fun, like personality types, what Hogwarts house would you be in, but it's actually really been transformative for my relationship with myself, with others, and with God. I just got off of a vacation, and 4 of those days was spent with a dear friend backpacking, and we talked for 4 days. We're really close friends, and I was a little nervous about spending 4 days with one person. But we just like talked and talked and talked. And at the end, she was like, we've known each other for years and we're really good friends, but I feel like I know you so much better. And I felt so loved, because it wasn't because we had just backpacked 40 miles. It was because she knew me, and it was a safe place to be myself around her. And it was just like such a great reminder that I'm loved for who I am and not for what I do. And then I just want to say one more thing, which I've been exploring lately, is my roots in the feeling triad. Some of my shame is that when I see especially a woman be this achiever, success-oriented, aggressive stance, I feel a lot of shame around that. And what's been interesting is realizing that that sense of achievement, or that sense of success that I am constantly aspiring for, that ambition, is rooted in relationships. So it's not about toppling other people to get to the top. It's about wanting to be admired by everyone. I want to enter, when I go to a restaurant in normal times, I'm not just there for the person I'm with. I want to impress the waitress and, you know, the toll booth worker on the highway. Like, I want them to admire me. And I think to be admired, I have to do everything super well. And so I think that gets into my feelings, and that's kind of where I've been trying to grow lately, is to, I mean, really my entire life, is to access my feelings.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up that word, admiration, because all of these shame-based types do seek that that quality of admiration, and they often speak of it in slightly different terms. So three's admiration seems to capture this desire for connection from the ego. The ego assumes this is the way I have to get love, is through admiration. And for twos, it's often approval. And for fours, it's often to be seen for their uniqueness. And it just is a slightly different expectation from the external world on how that heart type will know that they have done what they needed to do to be able to be loved. And that's that lie, that's that facade that the ego structure tries to hold into place, so that each of these shame-based types thinks that they have to prove themselves in order to be loved. So I thank you for those. You magically picked the perfect word.
Well, I've read it somewhere, I'm sure.
Well, thank you, Anna. BJ, tell us a little bit about your Episcopal connections and how you know that you're a type 3.
Sure. Although I'd rather talk about Anna, who I have no doubt has impressed many toll booth workers and waiters and waitresses. But I'm sure the irony is she probably did so because of her authentic self, even though she was probably also really hustling to like put on the Anna show. So
right? So
what's that?
It takes one to know one.
I could be projecting, but I'm not sure.
Time for the BJ show.
Right, I know. Take out all of the things I pretended I was talking about Anna. I was probably just talking about myself there. But it's always easier to name somebody else. Hi, I'm BJ. I'm the dean. That would be a 3 thing, right? Like, I'm the dean. And it's but more, you know, I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church, and didn't grow up as an Episcopalian, as many of you know. I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church and stumbled my way into it, and I'm very, very glad that I did. I kind of first heard about the Enneagram in a way that led me actually to not trust it. The church where I had actually grown up, become an Episcopalian, it was a leading church in the diocese and in our city, and I was no longer there. I was now a priest and leading another church, and they were really into the Enneagram. It was like all about the Enneagram, and I found that the people who were kind of the vanguard of that loved to talk about it, but it's sort of only gotten at a surface level to where they were typing everybody else but not, I didn't feel like it was actually changing anything. It was just kind of getting up in my, it was just kind of annoying when people would type me incorrectly and tell me this is what I needed to do. And I don't think anybody of any type likes to be told who they are, especially when they're told wrong. So I wasn't sort of into it, and it sort of looked like it kind of looked like another version of navel gazing. And then of course my wife really got into it, and so I had to, eat those words. But it was really, I think it was, for me, I went on sabbatical in 2016, and I think it was that year I turned 40, and I had been as a priest for going on 10 years, and been a rector for 5-6 years, and it just seemed, my kids were more and more on a part of, they obviously, I had kids, but I was just, there's a lot in my world that was really changing. And I decided that one of the things that I was going to do was spend a little bit of time, I think largely at Joe, my wife's urging, spending some time with, really looking at what the Enneagram type was. And so I spent some time with the Riso Hudson, one of the big textbooks. And I really kind of dug in, and I took the test a few times. And there was some debate, some question. I was a little bit on the borderline of, am I a 7 or am I a 3? And I'd had a few people, I'd had someone in my previous church type me as a 7. I think that was a misread, and I'm not, I think it was unfair to me and unfair to 7s when I kind of look at how this person had done that. I think it was, well, it was, I don't think it as I took the test, it was actually not clear, which type am I, and it wasn't, you then you sort of read a little bit more of the things that we're proud, that make you happy to be whatever you are, and of course the achiever, and the things that we love to say, that's who we are. Oh, we're the producer, we're the ones who make it happen. And that really feeds the ego, and you want to say, yeah, that looks like me. But I actually found it was more as I kind of dug into the shadow side, and where it surprised me to realize that this was a heart center, because I often would say jokingly things like, oh, I'm fine, I haven't felt an emotion since 1992, so it's all right. Which is really not true, which is decidedly not true. And to sort of discover that, wait a minute, what's kind of beneath the surface is not what we produce, but rather how we really perceive the world. And the more that I did this work, I think the more I realized this isn't true of every Enneagram type, of every person. It's true of every Enneagram type, but it's not necessarily true of everyone. But that the sort of the brokenness, the woundedness, to really see how that description touched what was very true for me, helped me to say, I think that actually is where I am. And what I found, and it helped to be on sabbatical, it helped to be away from not only the push-pull, tension, and anxieties that exist in a lot of church systems, and to take a break from that, but really to take a break from the idea that I have to produce something. I have to be, if I'm not there the next day and day after that, stuff's going to fall through the cracks. And I'm very proud of myself, by the way. I didn't have a project where I had to actually really create anything in my sabbatical. But I realized as I had that time, and I also really was faithful to a centering prayer practice in that time. And actually, I didn't plan on that way. I just remember the first week of my sabbatical, I just know what to do with myself. And I realized that there was this there was a lot of stuff beneath the surface, and a lot of it was pain, and a lot of it was a sense of questions of how I had come to value myself unconsciously, that very much went back, you know, years and years and years back to before one considers oneself self-aware, if one ever really does. And I just realized that process, I the heart was suddenly a lot closer to the surface,
Mm-hmm.
a lot closer, and I realized that was that I'd kind of touched on something that was pretty real for me.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thank you, BJ. Well, you both have given us just a little peek underneath the heart, into the heart. And a story is coming to mind that I want to try to use to connect some of what you've both said. Was a friend of mine is a rector now in Pennsylvania, and when I was first learning about the Enneagram about 10 years ago, he was my first friend who was a 3. And the 3s felt so elusive to me. I mean, it's like I couldn't even figure out where like a real friend was that was a 3. It took me a while. And then when I finally realized that Joshua was a 3, I was so excited. And I remember I was describing him to a friend once, and they were like, well, tell me about him. And I said, well, he's the best priest I know. And something about that really struck me, that that what I knew of Joshua at that time was all connected to his priesthood. So his identity, he was able to find a job that made it so that his beingness and his doingness were all in one package, and he could both perform, but also had to dive in into himself to find that true sense of self. And then I meet Anna, and I meet BJ, and I meet Anna, and I learned that they're 3s, and I thought, well, these are the best priests that I know. And so there's a theme here about something about Enneagram 3s, and really that achievement. I guess I'm just noticing in priesthood, I feel like your ability to have a vocation that requires you to have to examine yourself to perform your job well lends itself to some really beautiful Enneagram 3 priests. So I name all that not to stroke an ego, but to just name my real experience of the few 3 friends that I have, and how often it's this sort of shared colleague experience. I don't know if there's anything you want to say to speak to that, about that joining. Does that make sense, that joining of vocation and maybe that 3 impulse to take on a job that has both performance and the requiring of you to examine, find your true self? Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much. I think I experienced that in a way that isn't it quite as positive. I think it's more, I mean, I encountered it in a less than positive way, which I think where every once in a while, I think, why why couldn't I have just gone into a number where I like filled out a job where I could just fill out a spreadsheet and not have to deal with this stuff? I mean, like,
you've really put it all in front of you. You've required yourself to have
you
to
really have to. I mean, and that sort of gets into things like family systems theory, where you realize that your family of origin and your workplace community, and that you have to be healthy in all of them. And your commitment to serve one is rooted, vocationally, is rooted in continuing to do the work in all areas of your life. And in those moments where, I mean, because that when in those moments when various or all of those areas are a dumpster fire, that's when you're like, man, I wish I had a spreadsheet job, because then I could just go do the spreadsheets. But in the moments when it actually comes together and you realize that there is a real, I think, a deep sense of integration, where you realize that I keep saying that word, realize, where we can actually see the fruit of the work that is sharing what we've learned, and hopefully some degree of health and wholeness with all the people in our lives. And that integration is kind of the payoff, and you realize that it's that's when it becomes a real gift. But I think you're absolutely right. We have to, if and even if it's not the best motivation, it's if we don't do that work, then if we don't do that inner work, then we're not going to be good at the stuff that is our job.
Mm-hmm. I think realize is a great word for a 3 to use to talk about this, because embedded in it is that word real. And there is this, it takes time for the 3 to figure out what's real in me. Because what others' expectations that are placed on the 3 seem so real that the 3 can fool themselves into believing this is where my identity is. And so to have a lot of realization seems like a good place for a 3 to be. Did you want to say something too, Anna?
Yeah. I think that, well, I am afraid of who I would be if I weren't doing the inner work. I think I'd be a monster. And this is probably true for every type, but it feels so visceral to me that it is so hard to do the inner work. Like, the things that come up after 30 years of repression are ugly. And when I did my chaplaincy internship, my CPE at the VA, I went to my 9 direction a lot to survive that, because it was easier for me to just sit back and not try to be the best, because it was really freaking hard. And my supervisor said, I was like, can I just realize that these things are here and put them on a shelf for later? She said, you can, but you have to go back to that shelf. Otherwise, they're going to come out in different ways.
You're going to give it to other people.
Yeah, and in unbecoming ways. And so I think since I really started my Enneagram journey, which includes like a lot of the family systems work, and I have a spiritual director through the Enneagram Institute of Ohio, so we speak spirituality in Enneagram terms. I think since doing that work, a lot has come up that I have had to process. I've also been in therapy for 15 years, so that's really helpful too. But I use an image of for my feelings and all of that, like shame and turmoil, that when I'm like, okay, I'm ready, I'm gonna open the box into my heart and see what's down there. I open it up and there's nothing there. I'm like, well, wait, but where are my feelings? And if I look harder, there's a trap door, and they're even deeper. And so a lot of what I do in spiritual direction is just like sitting with the feelings and letting them come out of the trap door, because I don't want to. Like, it would be it's so much easier to just pour myself into lists and my step-by-step 5-year goal kind of thing. But I think that if I didn't do this work, I would not be a good spouse, I would not be a good friend, and I would not be a good priest.
Yeah. And that's I think that was the catalyst for this part of the conversation, that that 3, so you have a call to priesthood, and that 3 impulse to achieve and be the best at doing that requires that you find that trap door, because you're not going to be a very good priest if you're giving all of your crap to other people and not aware of it yourself. So thank you for giving us that metaphor on maybe some of what that journey looks like for you as a 3, on trying to find where those emotions are and to let them out. And I'm struck again by BJ's joke with the teller, yours with the waiter at the restaurant. And if there's this impulse that comes so naturally to impress, these folks, how much more a therapist or a spiritual director, you know, someone that can affect perception of you, and how what great work that must take to be able to sit in that space.
So fun fact, my spiritual director won't see me in person or on a screen. She will only talk to me on the phone because she says threes say what will impress her. And so we're always looking for the nod and like the smile. And even on the phone, I find myself trying to make her laugh. And I'm like, geez, Anna, like, get over it. Because I'm telling her like the worst parts of myself or the most shameful parts of myself. And I'm still like trying to be her favorite spiritual directee. And I'm like, why?
I'm going to be the most vulnerable you have ever seen. You just sit back and let me dazzle.
Okay, I want to see if we can move a little bit toward the trapdoor. And I want to bring up this idea, the word loss again. And I'm choosing the word loss on purpose as opposed to the word failure. So I feel like loss maybe moves us more toward the emotional awareness of grief. I have heard a number of threes say that failure is not really in the vocabulary. Like threes can spin a situation to be able to see what good can come from it. And BJ, I bring this up because this is often where a 3 and a 7 can be mistyped. The motivations are different, but 7s will often spin a negative into a positive to avoid feeling sad. But a 3 is going to spin it to maintain the perception of always being better, of always being able to take whatever it is and put it toward whatever the goal is. So I wonder, what's your experience of loss, and how does that play into some of the self-awareness work that you both have had to do? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk about it, but I will.
And you can talk as little about it as you want. I know this is a really hard one. And how about this? This is a way we can spin it a bit. Part of the desire for this class is to help folks know whether they're a 3 or not. So this is an opportunity for you to speak to someone out there who's having a really hard time trying to find that trapdoor. And what are some insights you can give them in order to clue them into all this may not be BS, this in this whole Enneagram system. You know, how can you open yourself up to this deeper layer of emotion that's hard to get to?
I don't fail because I set my expectations low, so that if my expectations are met, like I'm a pessimist because if I meet that expectation, then I'm good, and if I exceed it, then I'm golden. So my conversion story is my confirmation story, which happened at Trinity, and a lot of you were witnesses to the biggest failure of my life, which is during my ESC program year when I had a mental health crisis and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and the situation wasn't handled well, and I felt really betrayed, and it was just ugly. And when I got out of the psych ward, I was supposed to be confirmed. And that's the moment I feel I was closest to God, because I stood up in front of this congregation and I didn't have a job anymore. My car had just broken down. I had just gotten dumped by someone I thought I was going to marry. I didn't have a house to live in until Gary and Melody took me in, as they are wont to do. And I lived with them for about 6 months. But I didn't have anything to show for myself. And I still stood up and said, I sign up for this. Like, I want to be on this journey. I affirm Christ as my Lord and Savior. And the bishop slapped me and said, I pray that you will increase more and more. And those are the words that are used. So I tell that story all the time because I was like, my hands were completely empty. Like, I did not achieve anything besides a new diagnosis and a bunch of meds. And it was just like, and I had also felt the first calling for the priesthood during that time. And so that was out of the door because I was told I was too crazy. I could never be a priest because I was too crazy. So I say that because I have felt that spot where I can't hide behind anything. I can't hide behind any medals, and I can't be loved because of my achievements. I had to be loved for who I was. And then I also use that story as a success story. Mm-hmm. Look at me now. That moment, that experience, those years made me a much better person. And I think I could have grown in similar ways without that like horrible experience, like that. I don't think God did that to me so I could grow. I don't think God wanted that for me either. But I am much stabler and a much stronger and more compassionate person because of that experience. And maybe it was just because of my brain chemicals, but maybe it was also because of where I was spiritually at that moment. But I was just like a naked little baby. Like there was no armor on. Mm. So I think since then I have learned which armor I want to put on. Do I want to put on my like full hazmat suit when I enter a situation? Do I want to put on like that like the wetsuit rubber where I can still feel things but it's not like super strong? Do I want to just put on like a mesh armor where most things can get through? So I think learning levels of vulnerability, not for ego's sake, but for truth's sake.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm curious, Anna, do you claim a wing in your work with
yeah. I mistyped as a 4 for a long time, but it was just my wing. Yeah, I was thinking like BJ probably had this experience too. Like this morning I tried like 5 different hairstyles to make sure I would like look the part. That was my 4 wing showing. For sure.
Well, I because the 3 is in the center of the feeling triad, both of your wings are feeling types and image conscious types. So awareness of image does show up strongly in the type 3, both because of the type structure itself and because of those wings. But those that lean toward 4 do tend to have more access to loss, to the openness toward grief as a potential conduit towards something else.
Yes.
And the vulnerability with which you just shared, I feel like is an example of that willingness. So thank you for.
And I only share that vulnerability as, I like the words you used, conduit towards something else. Mm-hmm. I'm not just going to be vulnerable without a point to it.
Thank you.
I can see that it's helpful for me and for others.
Well, were we talking about loss or failure or what?
Yeah, all those dirty words.
Next question, please. No, it's
even just that experience, sharing about that experience you're having right now is so helpful for people trying to figure out their type.
Yeah, it's the instinctiveness of the idea that failure is not an option is just deep, and in some ways it is it is This is one of the reasons why threes can have a hard time relaxing, which is, there is always things to be done, and if you don't do them, then things are gonna fall apart. And that can be at the level of, oh my God, I'm not going to get through my week, to, if we don't kind of get through this in the next 3 to 4 months, then big trouble on the horizon. And I think my work is often trying to figure out where that is real and where that is kind of stuff I'm creating, because the thing is, it actually, this is why threes get stuff done, and why you actually need that, because sometimes we're right. Sometimes if you don't get stuff, certain things happen, then things will fail. And yes, it's not the end of the world. Yes, failure is a nice teacher, but I once called, in my previous job when I worked in life incarnation, when I was in film production, I was just having a really crash and burn experience, and I called a mentor, and I just told her all about it. It was terrible, and she said, well, is there anything good from this experience? I said, well, I guess I'm learning something from it. But no, I said, well, it's a good learning experience. She said, yeah, so's prison, but I don't have to go. And so the sort of the idea that failure is not an option is very real. And I will say that in church settings, when you're as a priest, as a rector, as a head of staff, I think it is very real. We in the church have a very low tolerance for things not going well. And because it's one thing to be vulnerable. It's a whole other thing to sort of put your hands put in your heart in a whole lot of people's hands, when the expectations are often very high, and the churches aren't always the safest emotional systems to be vulnerable and to fail. I would say loss is a hard thing for me to talk about, because a lot of the stuff that I really grew up with, that kind of, to your point of realization and real, what's real and what's put on you, that stuff gets put on you. The stuff that is not real can get put on you at a very early age. And simply put, it was put on me, and I was a good 35 before I realized it wasn't mine. And really 40 before I realized it wasn't mine. I started to get hints, but then I sort of had this language. And the difficult thing is, a lot of that stuff still exists, and the same sort of family of origin stuff is still there, and that continues to be very painful. So that's certainly a thing. And I think, where have you loss? I would say when you're in, I mean, just moving to Cleveland and taking on this role that I love, and yet it was sort of it was a great loss to leave a system where I was sort of familiar, and after 8 years of being in the gig, I finally was feeling like a three who knew what he was doing, because a lot of times it takes 7 or 8 years to really get a sense to where you do know what you're doing, and then to sort of leave, and then to go in a new place, and to sort of have a sense that, what, I could fail. And not only could I fail, I've got a whole family that's riding on this, and it's riding on my ability to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, you look at Graham and Amelia Owens and say, okay, this might work, I hope. And then to sort of get into that sense of, projections and what we expect of one another. And there's sort of, there's a real loss of self, to sort of, well, I'll kind of candidly to follow a larger than life person. And the one projection is, you're just like that. And I would say, no, I'm not. And then the other projection is, oh, you're not like that at all. And, and like, not true either. It's like, I really found that there was a sense of grief in the midst of that, as I had to sort of figure out who I was, but while also not just being all about the work that I then do. to fulfill that. So, but that always behind it is, and there's the sense of, what if you fail? What if it doesn't work? I would say the first good 6 months of my time at Trinity, I really got to know my 9 side, which is like wherever that trapdoor is, I'm running down and hiding in it for a little while. And it's to kind of, as you learn and find your way and go through the grief period. I mean, changing places like that is it's close to it. It feels like a death, but it also then leads to incredible new life and things that you've never seen before that are just wonderful. But when you're in that grief period, you just sort of have to trust that God brought all this together for a reason. And that's, by the way, very hard for, I don't know if it's a personality type or just Enneagram or me, or any of us, to say, actually, it's not what I do. God is present in this. And let that really kind of be a guiding truth.
Thank you. Thank you both. BJ, I'm remembering something you and I were joking about John O'Donohue once. I think this goes back to your sabbatical time. You were that was a little bit of love affair with John O'Donohue poetry. Am I calling this correctly?
Yeah.
But we were talking about a chapter in one of his writings on the soul, and he's all about befriending soul. And that's maybe another word we could use for tapping into the emotional landscape in the self, knowing that place where we know that we are beloved by God for ourselves alone, that's we're here to be beloved by God. And I remember it was like something about the light and the way that as we're trying to get to that place of knowing our own belovedness, it's not always about shining the really sharp neon light onto the soul. Right. And exposing it bare, although we sometimes need to go there, and sometimes life circumstances force us to go there. And Anna shared some of that experience. And then BJ, I felt like you helped show us the tenderness that needs to be present for an Enneagram 3 to sort of circle and approach those system wounds, the childhood stories, and all of these different things that shape our ego structures, shape the way we think we have to move through the world. And I think that lesson about the light doesn't have to shine, super intensely all the time for the self-work to begin. You can begin asking those questions, approaching a word like failure and just asking it questions in a way maybe you never have before. And particularly so, I heard you naming that when your heart started opening up, you started building a family, the moves that you made were no longer just for you, but for this whole family unit too, that you were deciding to, in your example, uproot from North Carolina and come here. And I could just feel the tenderness of the experience of having to hold all of that while still being the achiever and going for the gold and going where you feel called. Does that help shape some of that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And part of it is there's gratitude too, in that the pieces of the achiever is, it's fun. And to be able to, there are a few, I can't think of a job I would want to have more than this. This is just absolute. I mean, there's so many opportunities, and and I watch what you do, and it's there's so much. It's complex. It's layered, and you have to do all this inner work, but also you get to do a lot of creative planning and thinking through. It's fun work, and it's a gift to be able to do it. And yet sort of that's the shadow side of it. Behind it is that sort of there's emotions behind it that are not fun, that we have to kind of wrestle with, that kind of can be on top, that's on us. And yeah, I mean, talking about the kids, that sort of forces you to kind of take it to the next level in terms of your accountability, because when does a 3 learn to get out of the way so that it's not about what we achieve, but then start seeing how the kids, how children, but really how anyone, coworkers, parishioners can find their own fullness, so that we're not taking up all the space in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Adrian, I'm wondering if I could tangent to how being a woman fits into that.
What?
Okay, cool. Because my spouse and I have definitely been talking about our family expansion plan, which is what I call it.
Pretty goal-oriented terminology.
Expansion plan. We've got like 3 different ways we could go. We're discerning which one. But it's been, I mean, all through our relationship, it's been like this, but especially in these conversations, seeing the reversal of traditional gender roles, and how one of the other like labels for a 3 is a provider. And I definitely live into that. And I pride myself a lot on always having made more money than my spouse. And just thinking about the roles of what it might look like for us to be parents as we future and go into that guess work, is becoming really clear that we see ourselves in roles that are definitely not traditional to our genders. And we're okay with that. I mean, we kind of celebrate it. We're like, oh, we're so cool. We're so modern. But he hovers between 4 and 5. And I am realizing in myself that my achievement and my need for efficiency, my need for success, fits a lot into my vision as a provider, including for my kids in the diocese at camp. Like, I'm like, I need to provide for you. I need to make sure you're okay. I need to be the rock that you can come to. So I see that in my work with children all through my life.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I think that's a helpful transition for me to name some of the ways in which other type 3s describe themselves. And this material comes from Helen Palmer, who's one of the narrative Enneagram gurus. So the basic proposition for the type 3 is love and recognition are only for champions. Have to be a champion to deserve love and recognition. The focus of attention, energy follows attention for every type structure, and the focus of attention is on tasks, roles, results. So that's where the energy of the 3 gravitates toward. That's what they notice, what needs to get done, who's in charge, is this the best way to get results? That's always at play. And what these performers or providers tell us that they observe about themselves is that primary identification is with accomplishments and success. Approval and acceptance is sought, and it's assumed that it's based on performance. Attention goes toward task. Image is very important. There's constant pressure to perform. And the pressure is experienced, I think, more as internal pressure to perform. I'm curious about that. Like, is it external pressure to perform or internal pressure, or how do you nuance that? And then the last one is that there's this inattention to feelings. Not that they're not important, but it's more like a just not now attitude. Just not now. We'll get there. I'm sure it'll be important at some point. But maybe that efficiency piece, they kind of get in the way of the doing parts and the things that have to get done. So is there anything that either of you want to speak to? I saw some smiles and nods as I was sharing some of those details.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, there are obviously part of priesthood is recognizing that emotional processes are a part of ultimately it's actually having some measure of awareness of that helps us to get where we need to go in the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that's kind of why I think we sometimes thrive in a crisis, because we finally have the freedom to just say, just shut up and get it done.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I don't mean this. That sounded bad over time, but you know,
it's how you move the system forward.
well,
right?
yeah, just sort of like, okay, I've got 2 or 3 get out of jail card, just like now, go.
Yeah, that's a good example. Was there anything else you wanted to comment, Anna? Or, I mean, you don't have to. This is what other threes are saying about themselves, and I've heard both of you name pretty much all of these.
Yeah. I'm grateful that I work with people who are not threes. I'm thinking of my colleague Brad Purdom, who is super intense and super laid back at the same time. And when I'm fretting, he goes, "What's the worst case scenario here?" And I'm like, "That no one will show up to the youth event." And he's like, do you hear yourself? Like, no big deal. So I'm grateful for like the mirroring, for people to remind me that perhaps some of the things that I think are crises are actually that internal pressure talking.
Yeah.
I like that you use the word mirroring there, because my perception of the three is needing to look outside of themselves to be able to know what to do, in a real basic general ego, way. And so for someone to take a mirror and put it up and say, yeah, what would you look like if that happened? Like, how would it really be horrible? Like, I'll still love you, like that kind of a feel, just to know that's okay if that happens. That's a beautiful, I think that's a beautiful metaphor to play with.
And I actually think this is one of the great things that threes do for the world, which is we really do have a sense of what needs to get done, or else things aren't going to work out. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is, yes, sometimes we're wrong. The challenge is how easily that becomes what our worth is. And if we can use that skill, is not a right word, but that instinct, but somehow separate ourselves from our sense of worth from our ability to then achieve from there, then I think that we're healthier. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's very easy to do. I don't know how to do it, because that urgency also creates anxiety, both within ourselves and in our whole kind of world. Yeah.
Well, I'm noticing that we're getting some questions in that I want to honor, but I really quickly want to point to something BJ just brought up, about sort of moving systems forward, getting work done, and being a gift to the world. And I want to point out that threes are one of the 3 types in the triangle, in the Enneagram system. And this is an image of balance, of being able to bring things into balance. And that's something that that threes do. And as they often do it through their doing, through being able to orchestrate efficiently activities to bring the system into balance. So it's said that 3, 6, and 9 keep the world going around. That is what these structures do. And whereas the energy of the 6 that we've already talked a little bit about, as the head type, in the center between 7 and 5, they hold the tension of the head types by vacillating back and forth, by essentially having a gap of knowing. They always leave the knowing option open, and that's how they sort of hold the tension of that corner of the triangle and bring stability to the head types. And the 3s, bring stability to the heart types by giving space for emotion. So sometimes it's hard to know what 3s are really feeling, because they push it aside so that they can hold the space for the heart types. So I want to name what BJ was talking about in sort of a, he named the world, so it might be confusing that I'm going to call this the micro level of things. But in BJ's world, let's say, he's the king of a hill, and he can efficiently shape what needs to happen in that structure to bring it balance. But in the Enneagram system, the sort of global perspective, the threes are also doing that to maintain the heart type structure of the Enneagram. So it's sort of it's an archetypal role that you play, even in the structure of the Enneagram, that also shows up in your lives. So for all you Enneagram geeks out there that want to understand the symbolism a little bit more, that's a little bit of a flavor of what the triangle does, and we'll learn how the 9 holds that tension at the top of the triangle when we get to the body types. So I'm going to switch gears from that and move toward some of the questions that have come in from our audience. The first one has to do with where space for God is when you're sort of approaching spirituality from that 3 ego structure. And this comes from Jan, and I don't know if this is what where Jan was coming at, but what it reminds me of is if you are always striving to be the best, where does God fit in to that in the ego structure, and maybe what you've learned or how you've learned how to connect spiritually to God? You can play with that question however you'd like.
I use the example of moving, and I found that my discernment and my prayer was as intense as it had ever been, because I was moving. I was taking on a role and a location and a place with which I was so deeply unfamiliar. And I trusted God because, it was a pretty thoroughgoing process. And I really had to let go all of this need to be in control of the situation, which is very difficult, and really bring that vulnerability to God. And it was almost of necessity. I had to be more deeply alive in my prayer life. I always like what Richard Rohr said. I don't like it, but it's a reality, which is we have these crashing moments in our lives, and that death, divorce, loss, that will kind of rattle you, that will profoundly you learn then to let God in. And so maybe in little ways and in sort of experiences of loss along the way, that I've just been humbled. And I think I've learned to realize that what a gift that humbling is, because you kind of you don't die,
Thank you, and thanks for bringing that to that connection of loss. Again, I think that's powerful for any 3s out there to be able to hear. Anna, was there anything you wanted to speak to?
Yeah, my prayer life has been a total journey, because, well, in the tradition I grew up in, there was a lot of emphasis on spiritual disciplines. And so that kind of perpetuated the idea that if I fast, if I do like 21 days of daily devotions, then God will love me. And so my spouse wakes up at 7 a.m. and prays for an hour, and then he does yoga and weights, and then he eats the same breakfast every day. And I'm like, dang it, that's what a good prayer life looks like. But that doesn't work for me. And so resisting the temptation to like put prayer on my to-do list and then check it off has been a really beautiful kind of Benedictine approach, which is just finding quiet, repetitive, I guess, motions of prayer. So walking without my phone. We have a mobile over our bed, so I'll just like look at it. Like, oh my God, am I accomplishing anything? No. And chopping vegetables is like my favorite form of prayer, because I feel like I am honoring the earth and just with my thoughts and letting people and things come to me. Prayers often come, like BCP prayers often come out then, but kind of just like, I guess it's a form of centering prayer that doesn't make me go down rabbit holes. Would just like letting room for things to drift in. Swimming laps is another one. And it's taken me a long time, and I still feel a little shame around it, to recognize that that is prayer, because it feels like on paper that doesn't count. Even if it is my favorite way to connect with the divine.
I love the way you just narrated prayer. One of the questions that came through was about grace, and so how to receive that gift that maybe we feel like we haven't deserved. And you just talked about, what I heard you just naming was being open to, in this receptivity, to just allow something good to come in without having checked prayer off of your list that day. And I don't know if that's what you meant, but is there anything else either of you might want to say to speak to grace and what that experience is like for you as a 3 to receive?
Yeah, it's totally a posture. It's a posture that I have to enter into. I also find myself, when I am giving messages or sermons, especially to younger folks, that's my spiel, is like, it's not about what you've done or what you're going to do or what you do today. It's about who you are. And I know that that's for me. But the story of the lost sheep, like, it's like that one sheep might not have done squat in their life, but the shepherd still goes to search for them. And I'm always like, no, it's cool. You should stick with the 99. Like, I'm just one. Like, I got this. You're fine. And I'm like, no, the shepherd still comes after me. So I guess it's a way of processing that message of grace, is to articulate it in my life. And I also, I learned a new term, my media diet. My media diet is full of podcasts about the Enneagram, to remind myself to be a better person in my relationships. But also, I listen a lot to the Mocking Cast, which the whole point is trying to find grace in the world. So grace is like every other word in that podcast. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's here. Remember to look for it. You'll find it.
Yeah, thank you. BJ, is there anything you want to speak to about grace? And also,
I imagine every path, every type is its own kind of journey of dismantling what you think it is and getting back to sort of the core. And I would say that for me in this type, the dismantling has been breaking apart all the different stories that have been put on my shoulders. That as a 3, anybody says this is a story and this is your role in it, and you're like, I'll do great at it, and then you go through, and then before long you don't realize that you've lived out something that isn't you. And so my work, I think, has been about dismantling all of those stories, which is why I am deeply suspicious of any story that I'm supposed to believe now. But in that dismantling is getting down, and that's when I feel like I've discovered grace. When to get past all those things, that whether I'm supposed to do or who I'm supposed to be, and to actually find something beautiful and unearned and active in the world. It helps to know that if I'm not doing it, something important still gets done. But this is not something. This is the kingdom of God. And that to me is a really like, there's a treasure beneath the scaffolding that I take apart. And that's grace, and that really does give me a lot of hope.
Well, I switched slides here, and you can ignore the word fear because that's not supposed to be there, so I apologize. But Anna and BJ both really just nailed the way that the vice works in type 3. And I have this image here of we call these vices sin in the Christian tradition, and for the 3, it's the sin of vanity, and it's not about stopping yourself from the thirst for self-glory. It's you can't make yourself not desire these things. But you can just start to release the need for it. And that's what helps the three get out of the box. And so they both talked about just making space to just sort of let it go. And then this grace comes in. And so I love that the work for all the types, but particularly for type 3 in the Enneagram, is that in order to be the best the best human being you can possibly be, you have to just let go. You have to actually do nothing. And you have to let God come in and give that grace. So you both just named that really well in different ways. And I want to bring up the last question. I'm noticing we're getting a little close to time, but we did start a little bit late. So we'll give a few more minutes. So Anna, if you do have anything you want to speak to with hope, you can. And then I'm going to move to a question about introversion and extroversion.
No, I don't think, I mean, it doesn't stir up anything.
Okay.
Hope. Okay, cool.
I'm too busy focusing on this ninja climbing out of this inbox.
Okay, it's too much activity going on here. How about this? As we move into this final question, we'll pop up our type 3 slide. I'll close in prayer in just a little bit. But one of the questions that popped up is just related to introversion and extroversion. And I have a complicated relationship with these words. I really love the way Myers-Briggs uses them and describes the different ways in which every personality is at times extroverted and at times introverted. But there was real appreciation from Debbie in the audience for what appears to be a kind of extroversion from clergy. And so she's wondering if you could speak to that and if that is all connected to the 3.
For me, you good.
Okay. I told someone I was an extreme introvert the other day, and they literally were like, what? No, that's not true. I'm like, yeah, it is, because I get my energy from being by myself. And I feel like in order to impress people and in order to get their admiration, I have learned the tools to do that. I remember in high school, I was like, I'm so bad at small talk. And so I started listening in on conversations and like literally taking notes, like, how does one small talk? And now I'm the one who's like learning the life story of the checkout person at Aldi, like I have achieved that. But I can also go 2 days without talking to anyone, and I need that. When I lean into my workaholic tendencies, I get to be a real grouch because I haven't nourished myself. And the way I nourish myself, in similar to the ways I connect with God, are just by myself. Nobody talk to me. Last night I told my spouse, I was like, can we not hang out tonight? I just kind of want to be by myself. He was like, yeah, it sounds great. Because I just couldn't do it anymore. So I think it shocks people because we do have social skills. I have social skills, but I would die if I were around people all the time.
I wonder too, Anna, if that speaks at all to the capacity of the chameleon. Like, oh, you need an extrovert right now? I'll just listen to people's chit chat for a while and I'll make myself an extrovert so that I can do that thing for you.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks for that story. It's great.
I have the same experience where I think I am pretty introverted, and people are like, no, can't be. And I kind of enjoy that, seeing that shock now. But I crave alone time, and I crave reflective time. The funny thing about it is, I mean, part of, yes, our role is an upfront public role. And when I am in that public setting, I am, I guess, extroverted, and it's not inauthentic. I think it's just more like controlled bursts. Whereas I'm not going to be able to glad hand for 8 days at a time. I got to crash and recover and recoup. But where, for me, the piece of the 3 piece is that there is such a danger to not having that kind of inward recovery time. And it's not just about refilling the battery. It's about, you can get lost in, getting high on your own supply. You believe, begin to believe the images that you put forward. And that's when even the extroversion becomes inauthentic. So it's, because we can read a room, because we learn from an early age what we need to do in order to perform. I think we need time to sort of put it out there and then sort of step back, because we can lose ourselves in that sort of the presentation of an image, in selling an image of product. That's sort of the real danger, that I think it just calls us to have a heightened self-awareness around it. And for me as an introvert, that sort of reflective time is what grounds me just a little bit more.
Thank you both. Well, Debbie, just not to burst your bubble on extroverted priests out there, I will say that I am an extroverted priest. And this is why I think extroversion and introversion can be confusing, is that I often come across, especially if you see me working in the office, as very pensive, focused. You'd think, hey, you don't want to interrupt her. But after this Enneagram conversation, I'm going to be flying high, because I just really got fed by the interaction and the connection with people. Even though I might look physically like I'm dreading it as I'm walking into it, that's not the case. I get energy from this. So
I'm gonna take a nap after this.
Yeah. So we're out there. The extroverted priest is out there, but it may not be in the person that you expect. Well, I am so blessed, and not a playful joke, because you're priests this time around, that you were both willing to share from your stories and give us two different images of what a 3 looks like, and some of that, as Anna said, under the trapdoor experience. Forever grateful, and I think it's really invaluable to any 3s out there that are trying to figure out their type, or trying to figure out whether they like the Enneagram or not. One of the most common things I've heard from 3s at their first introduction to the Enneagram is that it's all BS. Can't we all just be all of these numbers? So always one of the first signs it might be a 3, but really takes some sitting with it to believe that it's a system that can even be real. So thank you for going behind the veil a bit and giving us insight into that.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, everybody.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I like to put up this slide and see if there's anything that either of you want to just name as something you love, or you want to laugh at about your type, anything you want to highlight. And then I will close with a prayer from Sandra Smith, who's a Enneagram coach in Asheville, North Carolina.
I like the bendy clock up in the top left.
Yeah,
I feel like that's always a good sort of Sunday afternoon mode, is to like see the clock warp for a little while.
What I love about this image, I'm cheating and responding myself here, is like I noticed that there's a star inside one of the images, and then there's a heart in the other. And I think of like the gold star, but really like underneath, it's like really just wanting to touch the heart, like all those achievements, just wanting to touch the heart. So I love remembering that about the type 3.
Yeah. The word that pops out to me is competence.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big word for a 3. We didn't even talk about the competency types. But if you feel like you demand competency from others and yourself, you may be a type 3 or a 5 or a 1. Those are the competency types. Well, let us close in prayer. And Sandra Smith chooses a title for God associated with each type as she writes these prayers. And she gives 2 names for God. One is Source of Hope, and one is Divine Lover. And so those will show up as a particular message to the type 3 as this prayer is unfolding. So please pray with me. Source of hope, create in me a refuge for accepting myself, a place where I am fully known and loved. Dissolve my pretenses that diminish my genuineness. Empty me of the masks and facades that blind me to who I am and keep me unintentionally deceiving myself or others. Guide me deep, slow me down, open my heart so that the great love within me flows naturally with no need to impress or support any image but your own. Teach me to honor my fear and doubt, to remember the hesitant one within me that I push aside to keep up my impressive performing. Remind me to allow this little one within me, to have a voice in my life, that I may receive her wisdom. Divine lover of my being, be my foundation as I journey to my heart and express my feelings, my sadness, my anger, my delight. Those emotions I hold in check to protect whatever image needs to happen in the moment. For I am a lovable and a loved being, and I offer gratitude for all of those in my life who see me, who really see the real me and love me for myself. Amen.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be with you both.